Welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished, eminent, erudite Bharatanatyam dancer. I'm delighted to welcome Leela Samson.
Thank you.
Leela, you're a scholar who has written extensively about dance. You are at the pinnacle of your profession. Why and what role do you feel dance has in the community? What is its value, meaning, relevance? Why dance?
It's a lot of things. Well, I think basically it's just something that's fundamental to the human being, a need to express oneself. It comes from a child. You see it in humble, simple people. The need to show joy, if you like, or a sense of elan through the body. It is also the most beautiful, to me, I think, the most beautiful vehicle of expression, because especially now that we abuse the body so much, it seems more and more in society the need for one to look at it as something that is so striking in its simplicity, in its beauty, and in that everyone is different, and that when they express themselves either through the hands or through the entire body or through the face, through the eyes especially, that each one uses it so differently and yet so beautifully. And this is really what dance, the premise on which dance begins to move forward.
You have mentioned this aspect of how we all sort of tend to spontaneously express ourselves. You know, as I talk to you, I use my hand in a particular way and we tend to express ourselves. Yet sort of the Indian dance traditions are extremely, how do I say, rigidly stylized. It's prescribed, sort of different movements for different expressions. How do the two sort of dovetail?
This is like any other subject that has received the impulses of a mind and a thinking for, over decades, over generations. It gets more and more finite, and therefore more and more, in some way, yes, if you like, fits into tighter parameters. But in fact, like everything about life, the more, if you like, I don't like the word very much, but if you like disciplined one is, the more freedom one really has. It's the difficult thing is to find the absolute freedom, the absolute joy of roaming in a given, with a boundary. And that's what the classical arts, the reason why they're so difficult is that you do have to conform to not just a whole string of, do's and don'ts, but that to make it relevant to yourself and to the society in which you live in every given generation, in every given time, you're also changing it, you're also expanding it, you're also moving it forward in a sense, or stagnating.
But do you find that sort of the prescription of every mudra, of every rasa, of sort of, and the codification of this, to what degree is it necessary?
Well, it's a kinky, if you like, but it's also it's a very interesting vocabulary. I think with the very great masters, for instance, if you watched somebody like Pandit Birju Maharaj or Kelucharan Mahapatra, people of our time who were really great masters, Kalamandam Krishnaya, these people used very little of the vocabulary. They rose above it in a sense, and much of it was just free expression and very impromptu, non-conformist kind of dialogue. But if you look at it in the hands of a very young person who's just coming onto the stage, an 18-year-old, you'll find them doing sahitya, using sahitya which has many, many words. They have to say so much, do so much more to say such a little. And it's absolutely the opposite when you walked the path and when you've reached a stage where you hardly have to say anything to be able to get across to a large number of people. And this is the challenge, that actually the vocabulary may or may not be used. It's up to you really to discard a dozen little things that will become irrelevant only when you've got used to the...
To what degree are you inhibited or shall we say empowered that much of this also tends to derive from mythology, from the sacred?
Well, that's it. To me, mythology is a lot of fun. I've never had a problem with teaching students through these fun stories. They love it. They have something to hold on to. They're very real for them. The reason why Walt Disney is so popular and continues to be is because of this. It's really the caricature of existence, and I think that's wonderful. As far as the sacred is concerned, the philosophy is concerned, that is another whole realm, and that is a necessary realm to everything that has its roots in Indian thought, in Indian traditional, I wouldn't say religions, but in Indian philosophy.
Why is it necessary?
Because ultimately all of us, I think, if we can discard the reality of our times, the need to be well known or rich or whatever, if you go beyond that, then of course we're all on a search for a particular a goal, a seeking of some point of perfection in our lives, a seeking for some truth, and it depends on who we are, what sanskara we have, but how much we are interested in walking the path. But we're on a search. So for an individual artist, or for a drama company, if you like, or for a group of people, or for a nation, it's still the same. It's a development of the self, but not just the physical self. I would
When
like
you
to
talk
think.
about sort of search and seeking,
Yes.
what fulfillment has dance given your search and seeking, and what is your search and seeking?
Well, it's the perfect foil, I think, because it's so physical that you can miss the point completely, because it tends to make you in the beginning, especially a woman, the large majority of Indians, the attitude towards Indian dance or an Indian dancer or a woman who's a dancer has always from time immemorial been something that is that has various connotations, let's say. To be in a field where the physical is so vital, and to be able to actually seek to discard it completely, and to not just for yourself, but to make an audience see something that goes beyond the physical. I think that is interesting, because for me it's a constant. I'm somewhat taken aback when somebody mentions something that is very physical about what I did, because it is exciting, and I think all art must have an element of excitement and joy and joie de vivre, and it must also be cheeky and daredevilry, if you like. But the wonderful thing about the Indian dance forms is that the sahitya has always directed itself towards the search of the jivatma for the paramatma. Now, whatever words we might use, people tend to listen to such words because they're either in Sanskrit, usually in Sanskrit, and immediately define it as being a very Hindu thing. I totally disagree. I think it's a very universal thing. It's any artist in any part of the world has that same ultimate desire to forget the physical, to forget the presence of the present, if you like, and to go into realms that are where there's quietude, where there's another thing happening.
You mentioned this aspect of physicality, and I was reading an article about you where you sort of talked about de-glamorizing yourself and not sort of being concerned about not being glamorous. I mean, I'm not sure that's an accurate description, but we'll just accept it. And do you sort of consciously feel that maybe you have to sort of, in the way you perceive yourself and the way you project yourself, that somehow to be true to the art and to these higher realms that you're talking about, that some ways you need to sort of consciously avoid glamorizing it because it may detract from the essential of what you're doing, you're striving?
I think so, because, one is I like to, at most times, to be true to myself, and I'm not a very glamorous person, but...
as you perceive yourself.
No, I know what the dance can do to you is that the ego can become very upfront. Most dancers are fairly attractive people. They therefore that can be sort of almost an overriding thing which you're dealing with. You have to deal with it yourself. I mean, it's not just that that you throw that at an audience and say take it, but it's also that having to deal with it all through your life. It must be a very big burden, and mostly when you watch a dancer, very often when I was growing up, I could see that the personality of the dancer was imprinted on the dance form, and you almost went to see the dance. Well, it's true, you do go to see the dancer, but there's also a very beautiful form there, and we are just I'd like to think that we're just the carriers of that. We're using that language, or we're using that medium to express ourselves.
So what is the distinction between dance being your personal sadhana for your own discovery and the relationship between mind and body and the sacred, and dance as performance?
This is the thing, that it's really such a it's like walking on edge at most times. There are various things happening here. One is, we talked about that. I find that very interesting, that you use the body as a form of expression. There are given standards of perfection as far as what a very male-dominated society thinks of what a woman should look like, and what is beautiful in the dancer. The Shastras have in fact written them all down, but how she should be, and so you have to deal with that on the one hand, and yet forget that. Then on the other hand, there's this whole thing of performing, for actually being on show, which is a very it's not a personal thing at all. It's a very and yet there's I think an audience would never forgive a dancer who doesn't go into herself, in a sense, and bring out something that is that extra something that is not totally apparent in just the learning process. So it's really a very non-private thing, this performance. It's something I don't like about performing at all. And yet when you're on stage, it's almost like being on an island by yourself, where when the lights go off, there's almost nobody there. So in a sense, it's you can actually get lost. A very private person can also get lost in this strangely very public place. And it's one of the things that amazes me about the form, because I was a bit of a tomboy, I must tell you, when I was small. I hated dressing up or jewelry, or I swam and I rode horses, and I cycled, and I did whatever my brothers did. And if anybody had said to me that you're going to be a dancer and you're going to be on stage and all decked up, I would have sworn it would never happen. But it's something that is like a garb. To me, it's something I can hide behind. Very often dancers, senior dancers, for instance, Chandralekha has a very valid argument. They said, why don't you divest yourselves of this paraphernalia that goes with the dance? And I tended to agree in days when I was more radical and, you know, fighting everything that was the norm. But now I find that it's not so easy to be, it would be a further bearing of all, if you like, you know. While with this paraphernalia, you almost are able to cover yourself up. But that a dancer is able to speak through that, or speak to you in spite of that, honestly, is the wonder of the thing. I mean, that, you know, you can sort of almost forget it all.
Does one have to be a sort of a good human being to be a good dancer? Because we hear so much about sadhana and purity of emotion and communicating that. To what degree does that sort of moral, ethical framework determine how good a dancer you are?
Well, I grew up in an institute and under the influence of somebody who kept, I mean, I often heard her say that I don't care if you're a good dancer or not, I just want you to be a good human being. And she definitely created an environment which tended to emphasize many other things other than the dance.
Well, we should sort of explain to the audience that you went to Kalakshetra and you were working with Rukmaniji.
Yes. So, well, you know, with somebody like her, the thing that I noticed or absorbed most about her was her philosophy. It wasn't her dance. So there were many other things that that spoke to me through her. And as you know, Kalakshetra was founded on the whole theosophical background, and religion in its narrow parameters didn't have anything to do with the place. And yet there was a very fundamental acknowledgement of Hinduism as a very profound philosophy. But she was very strongly, as you know, she was influenced by Buddhism, and we had prayers of all religions, and she was a great admirer of the Dalai Lama. And there were so many wonderful things happening that I don't think there was much room for the ego there in terms of, as a student, there were too many other vital things that were coming at you, and the dance was one of them. So that, I don't know about a good human being, but I think that's important for anything. But it's certainly, it would be very useful to see an artist who's honest, and honest not just to trends, latest trends that are, you know, that sell in the market or whatever, but to be honest to their own development along the path. Because if I'm not ready to do what XYZ is doing, then it shouldn't hassle me, shouldn't worry me. But if I jump onto the bandwagon of what is popular and what is, then I think I'm being, in a sense, dishonest to myself and to my own sanskara. We're not the same. We're all different. We come with a different baggage. We have some burden of baggage, and we also have some assets.
You know, you have in your life and commitment as an artist, at least as perceived from the outside, made an enormous personal commitment to the exclusion of a great deal of you know, the aspects of getting married, a family, and other sort of socially recommended, shall we say, forms of how has that been a conscious choice, or has that been a natural flowing of your commitment and your involvement in dance?
No, it isn't anything as beautiful and as idealistic as that. I think life just takes you. You accept the challenges it gives you. You accept the you know, that which is not perhaps to be. One has to learn to take that as well. I didn't make a conscious choice not to marry. I would have been probably very happy to put my feet up and let somebody pay the bills, but but no, it's just, I think you're fated to, as I say, I didn't ever intend to be a dancer. Even when I finished school, I had finished my diploma course in Kalakshetra by then. I still didn't know I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be a surgeon, and my mind was on medicine, and I wanted to use my hands, yes, but I didn't think they would be using such delicate mudras. But it was only when I went to, post-college that I realized that I did have something that that I might like to do. And it wasn't till much later, when I was already recognized, that it hit me on the head that I had a career in hand. So, and as far as giving up the other things, I just was involved in what I was doing, and I think unreasonably so sometimes, or certainly at the right time, so that it must have put off a good number of people. And
your life seems to have this sort of incredible quality of flow and surrender and harmonizing with that flow. Have you had ever had a doubt or about what you were doing and its value and meaning?
No, not. I haven't liked a lot of about the field. I still don't. I feel in some way that I'm a misfit. Everything about it, and it's nice that we talked about things that that I spend a lot of time on, and that is that there is much about it, including the glamour, the physicality of it. I am certainly in my mind inclined towards more peaceful pastimes. I can't even see myself sometimes as a dancer. But I like my colleagues. They're, in a sense, they're mad, they're interesting, they're bitchy, but many of them have given up a lot for to keep this art form alive for the next generation. And I think it's a lovely pastime. I like teaching. I like the fact that I'm able to interact with young people all the time. Keeps me up to date with their jargon and their thinking.
You described sort of your colleagues as mad, interesting, bitchy. How do you relate? What are your relationships with your
I have
colleagues?
Some very good friends out there, actually. I find I've always been very keen to know them, but there are these invisible walls that came up between all of us, and I think it's because of great sense of insecurity. Each one is so paranoid about themselves that and their own careers, that there is a natural, or what they consider to be a natural shunning of all other of a natural relationship, because we who better than them to understand what you're going through, all the pain, all the things you have to put up with, the musicians, the organizers, travel, money, the managing husbands or not, or whatever. It's something that I think we could be very good friends, and I have some wonderful friends. I'm happy that we have a good understanding, we get along well. We are a generation of dancers who've actually been able to bring the styles together on stage, and that's not easy, because you need to really dialogue on that, and there are two bodies speaking, and so there's great ego clashes. That could really be something. But for instance, with Madhvi, there's been a wonderful relationship where we don't feel each other's we don't feel that we're attacking each other's areas of work or anything. And there are others. I think almost every other young dancer of my generation I know and respect and get along fairly well with.
How do you cope with, at least from the outside, sort of the perceived politics of patronage, particularly institutional patronage of the state, that supports some artists, doesn't support other artists. There isn't an empirical scale that can decide person X is better than person Y.
Yeah.
How does that sort of work?
I think you have to ultimately, one thing you can do, which most dancers would like to do, and that is to have a little sugar daddy somewhere, especially somebody in power. That's one way of working it. The other way is, of course, to accept what comes your way and not to get hassled when it doesn't.
Which is really what we perceive you as having done.
Sadly, I think somebody is going to say out there. No, I don't know. I think you have to just. I'm happy. I don't let it worry me. There was a time when you're young. I think when you're really smothered by all the parameters of it, you let it worry you, and but there's nothing you can do about it, and I think there will always be, and it's the same all over the world. It's not just in India.
What dream, what aspiration have you set for yourself now, or is it just an ongoing process?
I don't do that sort of thing. I don't tend to give myself a goal. I sort of go with the flow, more or less, and I think if opportunities to do various things. I mean, I like to experiment with teaching, with choreography, with my own work, and if I get those, I'll go with it.
Well, there's so much we could have talked about your school, about the relationship with your students, but sort of time always comes to a stop sometimes, somehow on television at least. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is a distinguished, eminent, erudite Bharatanatyam dancer. I'm delighted to welcome Leela Samson.
Thank you.
Leela, you're a scholar who has written extensively about dance. You are at the pinnacle of your profession. Why and what role do you feel dance has in the community? What is its value, meaning, relevance? Why dance?
It's a lot of things. Well, I think basically it's just something that's fundamental to the human being, a need to express oneself. It comes from a child. You see it in humble, simple people. The need to show joy, if you like, or a sense of elan through the body. It is also the most beautiful through the entire body, or through the face, through the eyes especially, that each one uses it so differently and yet so beautifully. And this is really what dance, the premise on which dance begins to move forward.
You have mentioned this aspect of how we all sort of tend to spontaneously express ourselves. As I talk to you, I use my hand in a particular way and we tend to express ourselves. Yet sort of the Indian dance traditions are extremely...
to me, I think the most beautiful vehicle of expression, because especially now that we abuse the body so much, it seems more and more in society the need for one to look at it as something that is so striking in its simplicity, in its beauty, and in that everyone is different, and that when they express themselves either through the hands or